This is a story about a man who, with his wife and family, lived in abject poverty, barely able to subsist, much less give charity, as was their wont to do. So it was decided that the man would leave his home and travel in an endeavor to find a way of a better life for himself and his family. He traveled far and long. For 18 years, he moved from place to place, finding work where he could, until finally, after that time, he had acquired a bag of copper coins, a bag of silver coins, and a bag of gold coins. At this time, he decided it was time to return to his home. And in his travels, he came upon a town in which a fair was being held. And he thought to himself that he might be able to find a gift for his beloved wife. So he wandered around the fair from stall to stall, but nothing captured his interest as a gift for her, until he espied an old woman sitting on the outskirts of where the stalls were, and in her lap she had a handmade shawl. So he approached her and asked her how much was the cost of this shawl. And she said, "The shawl is not for sale. I am a merchant of a different kind." So he asked her, "What is it that you sell?" And she said, "Wisdom. I sell wisdom." So he asked her, his interest piqued. He said, "How much would it cost for a piece of wisdom?" And she said, "A bag of copper coins." He handed over his bag of copper coins, and she said to him, "The wisdom is, always take the straight road, not the short way." Now he scratched his head. How could this be a piece of wisdom? But somehow the old woman had captured his attention, and so he thought to himself, perhaps if I ask her for another piece of wisdom. So he offered her his bag of silver coins and asked her, "What piece of wisdom will you give me for these coins?" And she said, "That which is ugly is beautiful." So again he thought to himself, what use is this piece of information? But she seemed to read his mind and said, "Wait, this information may be helpful to you at some time." But somehow this old woman had some aura about her that drew the man in even more. And he said, "Well, what piece of wisdom will you give me for a bag of gold coins?" And she said, "Go to sleep on your anger. Do not act until the morning arises." Now, he was somewhat upset with himself. How could he give all that he had earned over these 18 years for these 3 pieces of what were purported to be wisdom? So he turned around. But when he turned back, the old woman had disappeared. All that remained on the ground where she had sat was the shawl and a loaf of bread. So, bending down, he thought, well, since the shawl is here, I will take it with me. But to his very great surprise, when he lifted the shawl, it was heavy, and he found therein his bag of copper coins, his bag of silver coins, and his bag of golden coins. He asked the stallholders around, did they see the old woman? And they said, what old woman? We didn't see any old woman here. So shaking his head, but carrying his bags of coins and the shawl, he set off down the road in the direction of his hometown. At midday, several days later, in the heat of the day, he sat down under a tree to eat the loaf of bread that he carried. And it happened that 2 carriages came by, carrying groups of merchants on their way to another town. Seeing him on the side of the road, a traveller, tired, they offered him a place in the carriage. And as they travelled, they came to a crossroads, and a great debate went on between them, whether to take the road that led directly to the village they aimed for, or to take the shortcut around a side road. Now it so happened that our man glanced at the shawl he was carrying and remembered the words of the old woman, take the straight road. So he managed to convince those in his carriage to do so, leaving the other carriage to take the short way. But they arrived at the village before those who had taken the short road and wondered what had happened. Maybe a wheel had fallen off, or they'd been beset by robbers, so they went to seek. And sure enough, they arrived at a place where the carriage had been beset by robbers, but when the robbers saw them, they ran, leaving the merchants with their wealth. The grateful merchants repaid our man with gold, and he went on his way. But his travels brought him to a place where he saw that the town was in anarchy, people looting and robbing and generally acting lawlessly. And then, as he happened to pass the palace gates, he saw inside the people, the servants, jeering at a creature, misshapen, protrusions all over his body. And looking at this being, suddenly he remembered the words of the old woman. What is ugly is beautiful. And looking at this creature, he said, you are beautiful. as are all of God's creations. Immediately, this creature who had been so misshapen became a tall and handsome king, as he was, and he explained that he'd been cursed by a wizard who said that he could only be returned to his rightful state when someone called him beautiful. The king gave him more gold before he went on his way. And after some while, in the evening time, he came to his home village, but not wanting to surprise his wife at night, he went to a small inn. And when he entered, to his great surprise, the servant who was to guide him to his chamber was none other than his wife, who looked at him but seemingly did not recognize him. He was angry. How could it be that after all of this time his wife could not recognize him? Perhaps it was because of his grey beard. Perhaps it was because of his rich clothing now. And he decided that he would leave. What was the use of staying here when he was not recognized? But again, he remembered the wisdom of the old woman and decided, as was given, to rest for the night. In the morning, he was accosted by his wife, who said, "Sir, forgive me if I stared at you last evening. You reminded me of someone I loved. My husband, who left 18 long years ago, and I fear to be dead." Her husband embraced her and said, "Forgive me, forgive me. I thought that you had forgotten me. I return with riches for us to share." And indeed they did. From that time on, they were not only able to live in comfort and graciousness, but to give the charity that they had so longed to share. Perhaps it can be suggested that this story gives us 3 main points that we may recognize are points along our own spiritual path. The need to give up everything we've gained: knowledge, wealth, and also to have learned obedience, whatever name we call it, the God Self, our spiritual center. We've had to learn to obey its bidding. But there is a third. What is this third pointer, experience on our spiritual journey? Giving up all, learning to obey. What is the third experience we have had and pointed out in this story? What does this story confirm for us?